Have you ever wondered why the darkness inside her becomes his greatest tormentor? In the quiet corridors of her soul, she uncovers the parts of herself that society taught her to bury: her rage, her desire, her raw, unfiltered truth. She moves through the world, no longer pretending that her beauty is only in her brightness. Instead, she invites him into the chiaroscuro of her psyche, and he finds himself entangled in the depths he once feared. This is not a story of submission, but of sovereignty. When she embraces the shadow, she becomes whole, and he becomes captive to the gravity of her power. She walks through crowded rooms like a living eclipse, drawing eyes toward the mystery of her contradictions. They see only the light at first, her laugh, her grace, her vulnerability made exquisite through vulnerability. But as she allows the darker notes to resonate, a sharpened wit, a fearless stare, a subtle defiance, he feels a shift in the air around her. Nothing in him can remain unchallenged. Each suppressed dream she resurrects, each denied emotion she claims reverberates through him, forcing his own defenses to tremble. He who once pursued her as one, chases a reflection, now finds himself pursued by the truth of her being. In observing her integration, he confronts his own split self. Unable to project his anxieties onto her any longer, he must stand face to face with the parts of himself he disowned. The proud ego that once strutted in confidence finds its foundations cracking under the weight of her authenticity. She does not shrink from her anger. She leans into it like a seasoned sailor harnessing a storm to carry her home. She does not smother her grief. She honors it like an oracle that speaks of loss and the promise of rebirth. Her shadow is not a flaw, it is a source of infinite guidance. And as she walks in balance, she casts a magnetic field that draws him helplessly into orbit. You watch her and feel a knot of envy and awe tightening in your chest. What would happen if you allowed your own shadow to breathe, if you honored the parts of yourself long kept in chains? How many walls would crumble around you? For her shadow work is not a one-time ritual, but an ongoing dialogue with the self. She listens to the whispers of her unconscious, the language of archetypes and symbols that guide her toward wholeness. She reads Seneca's counsel on inner fortitude as one studies a map through uncharted terrain. She recalls Marcus Aurelius's reminder that obstacles are the path. Every wound she once hid becomes a threshold to deeper self-knowledge. And in that constancy of inquiry, she cultivates a freedom no external force can diminish. He remembers the days when her laughter was a promise of sunshine, and he longed to be the source of her happiness. But now, her laughter carries the echo of shadows embraced, and he realizes that true joy cannot exist without the gravity of sorrow. Her smile is no longer an invitation to soothe her, it is a declaration of her sovereignty. In that moment, he becomes aware that his attempts to control her reactions were futile from the start. He is bound not by her pleas or her tears, but by the magnetism of her integrity, her unbreakable bond to the totality of herself. As her prison guard, he learns that walls built of fear and denial will always fall before the alchemy of acceptance. Her shadow is not a weapon wielded against him, but a mirror held up to his own disowned parts. Each time he recoils, she meets him with steady eyes that neither lead nor follow, but simply observe. She knows that true transformation is an inside job. And because she stands unwavering in her truth, he realizes that nothing in the outer world can bind her, and no tactic of manipulation can hold him when he chooses to step through the threshold of his own shadow. In that dawning awareness, he becomes her prisoner, not through chains or force, but through the irresistible pull of her wholeness. He learns what every Stoic knew, that freedom lives within the mastery of the self, and so he stays not to dominate or to save, but to witness her journey and to begin his own. Her power lies not in denying her darkness, but in weaving it into the tapestry of her light. And in that weave, he finds himself forever bound to the mystery of her becoming. She moves through the world now, unafraid of the half-formed whispers that once lurked in the shadows of her mind. The fragments of anger that she once masked behind polite smiles now pulse through her veins like living fire. He notices it in the way her gaze lingers on injustice, her jaw setting each time she hears a story of betrayal, her chest rising as though she inhales the collective grief of every woman who was ever silenced. In this fierce recognition, she honors her own wounds, and in doing so teaches him that vulnerability is not weakness, but the very forge in which strength is created. He senses the subtle shift in their dynamic when she begins to articulate her desires without apology. Where before she offered only honeyed words, now she speaks with the clarity of a bell, each tone resonant and unapologetic. When she names what she wants, he feels a tightening in his throat. This woman no longer relies on his interpretations or validations. She relies on herself. Watching her claim her truth, he experiences what it means to be deprived of a narrative he once controlled. His old tactics, gentle persuasion, fleeting charm, no longer hold sway. He realizes that her sovereignty eclipses every tactic he deployed when she was still in her hushed persona. You, watching from the edge of this unfolding drama, feel a curious exhilaration mixed with a tremor of fear. If she can reclaim parts of herself you never imagined, what would your own life look like if you dared to excavate your unspoken truths, to probe the crevices of your psyche and retrieve the treasures buried under guilt and shame? She beckons you through her example to step into the labyrinth of your shadow. Once you do, you may discover that the hidden rooms of your soul hold not only fear, but also sanity, clarity, and a fierce passion that has lain dormant. In her deepening introspection, she conducts nightly dialogues with the unconscious. Symbols surface in her dreams, black ravens, gnarled roots, twisted mirrors that she deciphers like an ancient map leading toward her authentic self. She recalls Epictetus's wise counsel that pain is the pathway to purpose. Each sorrow-filled night, each echo of shame becomes an offering to the altar of her rebirth. She holds her own reflection in the darkness until the cracks in her armor reveal the fierce wildness beneath. And as she tends to these inner fissures, her spirit grows more radiant, like a moon rising through ruptured clouds. He watches her ritual with a mix of awe and helplessness. He tries to follow her into this inner temple, but the entrance is barred to those who have not earned their own keys. Each time he offers to take her pain away, she refuses because she knows that only by shouldering her own darkness can she truly embody freedom. She thanks him gently but firmly for his concern, but she will not swap journeys. She insists that transformation comes from the inside out. He realizes then that the power he craved was never about possession. It was about connection, genuine and unfiltered. And she teaches him how to connect by facing the unspoken, by naming the nameless, by holding space for the whole self, even the parts that tremble. As she grows into this integrated self, her presence becomes a gravitational force, drawing him not into her sphere of influence, but into the orbit of his own awakening. He finds himself captivated, not by her beauty, but by her truth. The masks he once wore, stoic detachment, casual humor, feigned indifference, slip one by one, revealing the tender, wounded boy beneath. He cannot hide from her now. His defenses, meaningless in the face of her authenticity, dissolve like morning mist under the sun of her insight. Do you see how the dance transforms when both partners bring their full selves? How the relationship ceases to be a battlefield of projections and becomes a shared crucible of growth? She stands at the threshold of her own becoming, and he stands beside her, no longer a jailer, but a fellow pilgrim. And in this shared journey, they discover a new terrain, one where love is not a chain but a covenant of mutual awakening. Yet he remains her prisoner, for he cannot unsee the power of her embodiment. Every suppressed desire she liberates echoes back to him. Every reclaimed piece of herself shatters the cage of his old patterns. He finds that the more she steps into her shadow, the more he steps into his. And in that mutual descent, they ascend together, forging a bond that is neither possession nor surrender, but a living testament to the alchemy of integration. Her story beckons you to witness, to learn to act. If you have ever felt the tug of your own disowned self, if you have ever longed for permission to unleash your hidden depths, let this be your call. The journey of shadow work is not a solitary path. It is an invitation to every soul, ready to embrace its whole. In this embrace, you will find that you do not need to conquer the world. You need only to conquer the world within. She carries her shadow like a lover's secret tenderly, and without shame, weaving its threads into the tapestry of her day. Where once she straightened her spine to hide the tremor of insecurity, now she lets her posture shift with every pulse of authenticity. He notices it in the small gestures, the way she tilts her head when her mind wanders into the murky waters of doubt, and yet doesn't recoil. The way she lets her voice waver when naming her fears, as though giving them permission to breathe. These cracks in her armor are not flaws, but doorways through which her true self emerges, and he feels irresistibly drawn to explore the rooms she reveals. In the sanctuary of their conversations, she invites him to witness her revelations without attempting to fix them. She speaks of the child she once scolded for crying the part she banished in favor of perfection. She confesses the rage she labeled unfeminine that now courses through her arms like lightning. He hears her and resists the urge to soothe, because she does not seek consolation, she seeks acknowledgement. In honoring her pain, he discovers that compassion is less about alleviating suffering than about holding presence in the face of it. And as he learns this, his own heart unclenches, and the walls he built around his vulnerability begin to crumble. You recognize the weight of this dynamic. She no longer hides her broken wings, but stretches them toward the sun, inviting its warmth to heal the ragged edges. If you have ever folded your own wings to fit expectations, take note. The true flight begins when you let the wind touch every frayed feather. Her journey teaches that integration is not a destination, but a daily act of courage, an ongoing dialogue between light and dark, strength and surrender. She consults her inner compass, calibrated by the wisdom of Epictetus. It is not events that disturb her, but her judgments about them. When she catches herself slipping into self-judgment, she pauses, breathes, and returns to the here and now, reminding herself that every shade of her soul is worthy of love. He witnesses this with a reverence that borders on worship. The man who once chased her for her beauty now lingers at the threshold of her soul, humbled by her unflinching gaze. He learns that true desire is born not from the pursuit of perfection, but from the recognition of wholeness, light suffused with shadow. In this recognition he is freed from his own illusions, for she no longer serves as a mirror, reflecting only his desires. She reflects the depths of his own unconscious, urging him to excavate the treasures buried beneath his armor. And though this excavation may be fraught with pain, she stands beside him, a torchbearer illuminating the path ahead. In the mirror of her transformation, he sees the suffering he once denied the boy who wore a brave face while his heart shook. He sees the man who hid his tears behind dismissive laughter, who mistook detachment for strength. And as these revelations rise to the surface, he faces a choice to shrink from the discomfort or to let himself be shaped by it. Her example leaves no room for half measures. She navigates her inner terrain with the precision of a scholar charting unknown lands, yet with the compassion of a mother tending to a frightened child. This duality, rigor and tenderness, becomes the forge of her singular power. You might wonder, can love thrive in such radical honesty? The answer lies in witnessing the metamorphosis she instigates. Love becomes not a balm that soothes away suffering, but a catalyst that transforms it. When she embraces her shadow, she dismantles the false temples of dependency and codependency building in their place, an altar to authenticity. And around that altar he kneels not as a supplicant, but as a partner in the sacred work of self-integration. Her presence ripples through the fabric of his being. He no longer seeks to possess her, he seeks to honor her. Each time she names a pain, he whispers gratitude for the courage it took. Each time she claims a desire, he celebrates her freedom. And in this mutual celebration they forge a bond unbreakable by circumstance. Their connection becomes a living testament to Jung's insight that wholeness is achieved through the reconciliation of opposites. Light and shadow are not enemies but allies on the path to individuation. As you observe this alchemy, consider the shadow corners of your own life. What yearnings have you silenced? What aspects of your character have you disowned for fear of rejection? She beckons you to turn toward those shadows with curiosity rather than dread, to ask them what gifts they bear. In that inquiry, you will discover that your darkness is the soil in which your true power grows. And so the dance continues, she in her fierce authenticity, he in his growing humility, and you on the threshold of your own awakening. Each step deeper into shadow is also a step toward freedom. Each revelation of pain births the seeds of resilience, and each time you choose to face the unspoken, you break the chains that bind both heart and soul. She feels the pulse of her own transformation in every breath, as though the very air around her has been charged by the reunion of her fractured self. Each morning she greets the mirror not as a critic, but as a confidant, tracing the contours of her face as if mapping the terrain of her becoming. He observes her ritual with an intensity born of fascination. He sees how she dips into the well of her psyche, drawing forth memories she once feared would drown her. And in that fearless retrieval, she baptizes herself anew in the waters of self-acceptance. He too has begun to practice his own version of this ceremony, where once he numbed uncomfortable feelings with distractions, sports, social media, the hollow glow of a screen. He now sits in silence, listening for the stirrings beneath his calm surface. He recalls Epictetus's teaching that it is not events but judgment that disturbs the mind, and he catches himself before he labels his fear as weakness. Instead, he leans into the tremor as though it were a signal rather than a flaw. In naming his shame, he finds that its power over him diminishes like ink diluted by water until the stain loses its edge. You feel a stirring in your own chest. Can you make space for your hidden storms to rage and recede? Can you hold your own shaking heart with the same compassion she holds her sorrow? She shows you that the path to sovereignty runs through compassion for yourself, that the fiercest warrior is one who tames her inner tempest with gentle resolve. And when you witness her forging this new identity, you realize that your own shadows are not prisons, but workshops where your character is forged. Their relationship shifts from one of pursuit and captivity to a shared odyssey through unknown lands. She leads the way, lantern in hand, illuminating the caverns of unspoken fears. He walks beside her, no longer a guard at the gates, but a companion on the trail. Each time she names a ghost from her past, he acknowledges his own specters with a reverence previously reserved for her. They speak in a language of mutual restoration, weaving their stories together until the tapestry that binds them glows with both light and dark threads. In the quiet moments between them, she whispers that desire is not a lock to be picked, but a flame to be tended. He learns to stoke his own inner fire with intention rather than to seek sparks from her alone. And as the embers of his authentic longing rise, he sees that her shadow did not ensnare him, it released him from the prison of projection. He emerges as a man, reshaped by witnessing a woman claim her totality, and in that emergence he discovers his own rebirth. You may ask, what alchemy is this that transforms captor into captive seeker, into seeker? It is the alchemy of integration, the ancient art of reconciling the opposites within. Carl Jung spoke of the union of anima and animus, the dance of masculine and feminine energies that leads to wholeness. Here you see that dance in real time, each partner reflecting the other's disowned self until the mirror shatters and both stand free of illusions. In that freedom they share a bond not forged by need, but by choice. She reminds you that every shadow you deny becomes a tyrant in your life. The cruelty you withhold from your anger, the tenderness you deny your sorrow, the courage you refuse your fear. Each will find a way to demand reckoning. But when you welcome them as teachers, rather than treat them as enemies, they become the most devoted allies. They guide you toward depths you never dreamed to explore, and in those depths you find the luminous core of your being. He watches as she writes a new story for herself, one where her past mistakes are not tombstones, but stepping stones, each inscribed with lessons learned and compassion lived. He writes his own chapters in parallel. The boy who once equated stoicism with strength now learns that true strength is the vulnerability to feel and grow. He sheds the expectation that love is a prize to be won, and embraces it as a sacred covenant of mutual awakening. And in witnessing these parallel metamorphoses, you feel the pull of your own narrative. You realize that the journey she models is not reserved for the chosen few. It is available to anyone who dares to descend into their own underworld and emerge with an offering of truth. The invitation is clear. Dive into the dark waters of your unconscious, gather the pearls of untold stories, and let them shine. This part of their journey draws to a close, but the path stretches onward, winding through forests of doubt and over mountains of insight. They walk it together now, no longer bound by old roles, guided by the compass of integrated selfhood. The air between them hums with the promise that when shadow and light dance in harmony, they conjure a power uncontainable by fear or manipulation. She feels the echo of her own awakening in every gesture, as though the world itself bends to the resonance of her authenticity. He watches as she stands beneath a storm of her own making, confronting memories that once drowned her, yet she lifts her face to the rain of revelation and lets it wash away the sediment of self-doubt. In that downpour, she discovers that every tear born of genuine sorrow is an offering that nourishes new growth. She no longer hides the tremor in her voice when she speaks of past betrayals. Instead, she lets it quiver like a violin string played with tenderness, a haunting melody that draws him closer to the raw edge of her truth. He learns to listen for the unspoken currents beneath her words. When she falls silent, he trusts that her pause carries meaning, not absence. He senses the undercurrent of longing in her breath, the way her chest rises when she imagines a life unbound by others' expectations. He no longer tries to fill her silences with empty reassurances. Instead, he offers the simple gift of presence, anchoring himself in her reality without seeking to change it. In doing so, he practices the Stoic art of acceptance, witnessing what is without striving to alter its form. You may find yourself holding your breath, curious about how far she will dare to go. What boundaries will she cross when she finally sheds the last layer of performative grace? In watching her, you remember the time you censored your own laughter because it felt too loud, too eager to announce itself. You recall the moments you muted your anger, convinced that a good woman must always be composed. She invites you to unmute those parts to let your inner orchestra play without apology, weaving together the discordant notes of grief, rage, joy, and desire into the symphony of your becoming. Their relationship unfolds now as a ritual of radical witnessing. Each morning he asks her, not, "How are you?" but "What emerged in your dreams?" a question that honors the intelligence of her unconscious. And she answers, recounting visions of thorned roses and shattered mirrors of wild horses galloping through moonlit fields. In her descriptions, he hears the language of archetypes: the wounded healer, the fierce Amazon, the lover unafraid of ruin. He realizes that these dreams are not mere fantasies, but coded messages from her soul, guiding her toward the integration she craves. And by learning to interpret them, he deepens his own self-knowledge. She senses his transformation in the smallest acts. When she pauses at a crossroad of choice, he no longer urges her toward what feels safe. He reminds her to consult her inner compass. When she flinches at the memory of rejection, he does not smooth away the edges of her pain. He offers to hold it with her, as if their hearts were two pillars supporting the same vaulted chamber. In these moments, he practices what the Stoics called sympathetic joy, finding elation not in his own victories, but in the flourishing of another. Do you feel the shift in your own chest as you witness this? The gentle loosening of defenses, the spark of recognition that you too can be held with unwavering presence. She shows you that the courage to face your own darkness is a gift you give not only to yourself, but to every relationship you enter. When you step fully into your shadow, you become a beacon for others, illuminating the path out of denial and into community. He begins to document their journey in obsession-worthy detail. He journals not only the bright moments, their laughter echoing against sunlit walls, but also the tremors beneath the surface. He writes of the ache that follows her breakthroughs, the hollow space left when an old story finally ends. And in giving language to these liminal spaces, he creates a vessel large enough to contain the totality of her, and by extension, his own experience. This act of shared storytelling becomes sacred. They read each other's words aloud in candlelit rooms, holding the pages like prayers, acknowledging that narrative is the glue that binds psyche to soul. She invites you through her example to witness your own story in full spectrum, to sit with your shame until it yields its hidden teachings, to cradle your anger until it transforms into righteous fire, to allow your grief to shape you rather than shatter you. In that witnessing, you move from spectator to participant in the alchemy of self-transformation. Their bond deepens not because they need each other to feel whole, but because they choose each other as witnesses to their evolving truths. When she names the beast of her fear, he refrains from slaying it. Instead, he acknowledges its existence and bows in respect to its power. When he admits the parts of himself he once hid behind a veneer of masculinity, she listens without judgment, offering a sacred silence that says, "I see you, all of you, and you are worthy." In this fertile ground of mutual recognition, they cultivate a love that is neither possession nor sacrifice, but a sacred covenant of awakening. Their union becomes a model for all who hunger for authenticity, a testament to the fact that when two people embrace their shadows together, they become architects of their own liberation. As this chapter in their journey draws to a close, you might sense a threshold approaching, the moment when transformation ripens into transcendence. The air thickens with possibility, and you feel the pull toward the next great unveiling. In the hush that follows every confession, she stands bathed in the quiet radiance of her own becoming. No longer seeking validation in his gaze, she trusts the compass of her heart, its needle steady towards self-love. Where once she measured her worth by the measure of his attention, now she measures it by the integrity of her choices. Each morning, she breathes in the possibility of a life created from the marrow of her truth, not the mirage of approval. In this liberated state, she moves through the world as a sovereign being, her footsteps light but unwavering on the path she carves with each act of radical alignment. He watches her transformation as one might watch the tide reclaim the shore, inevitable, majestic, unstoppable. He feels the pull of her freedom like a tide in his own soul, drawing him away from the shoals of his old fears. He learns that love, liberated from the chains of expectation, becomes an invitation rather than a summons. He no longer clings to her moments of doubt. He honors them as the fertile soil from which her confidence blossoms. In doing so, he experiences a liberation of his own, the freedom to love without the burden of possession to witness, without the urge to control, to be present, without defining the contours of her journey. You who have watched their odyssey unfold may now glimpse the final alchemy, the union of two complete selves, each standing in the full light of their wholeness. She has become both healer and wounded warrior, and child goddess and mortal, an integrated tapestry of contradictions that sings with harmony. He has become both guardian and seeker, anchor and sail, comforter and pilgrim, equally complex and equally free. Their relationship transcends the old paradigms of domination and surrender. It becomes a dance of equals partners in a lifelong exploration of the self. In the stillness between them, they share a look that needs no words, a recognition that they are no longer captor and captive, but companions on the great adventure of individuation. They have learned that true intimacy is not the merging of two halves to form a whole, but the meeting of two wholes who choose to walk side by side. And in that meeting, they discover that the magnetic force between them springs not from dependency, but from mutual respect for each other's inner sanctum. She reaches for her shadow now, with a gentle hand acknowledging it as an ally rather than an adversary. The rage that once threatened to consume her she tames into righteous fire that fuels her purpose. The sorrow that once weighed her down she elevates into compassion that lifts others. The desire that once made her vulnerable she channels into creative power that shapes her world. In embracing her shadow, she has not become less, she has become more complete, more luminous, more free. He stands beside her not as a rescuer, but as a witness recognizing that his own shadow work is inseparable from hers. He nurtures his wounds with the same tenderness she has shown hers, learning that the darkness within is a crucible for the soul. Together, they practice the Stoic art of amor fati, loving their fate, accepting joy and pain as equal teachers. And in this practice they find a serenity that no external circumstance can disturb. You feel the echo of their liberation reverberate in your own chest, a call to cast off the prison of self-denial and step into the open sky of authenticity. You sense that the journey of shadow work is not a burden to bear, but a gift to unwrap, revealing layer after layer of your truest self. You realize that every fear you face, every part of yourself you reclaim, becomes a beacon not only for your own soul, but for all who journey beside you. As their story reaches its triumphant culmination, you are invited to pause and ask yourself, what parts of your shadow are waiting to be embraced? Which unspoken truths yearn for the light of your acknowledgement? And what power might you unlock when you too become whole? The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.